Hey everyone, it's Stongy Corleone here, and I am officially here with a kind of what if video. And it's a different kind of style where this time around I am not doing this with the poster beside me. I am actually doing this as a picture in picture where you see the title of the video and the picture in picture at the bottom is me. Because it would be kind of done in a somewhat audiobookish way, you know? The picture's not too small. You still see my face a little bit, obviously. But it's going to be a little what if. And it's a movie that, while, yeah, it should have stayed standalone. But however, I did kind of start thinking something. Knowing that this sequel is starting to get some fans that are trying to crazy defend it, being the same kind that are defending stuff like Alien 3 or Clerks 3 or The Last Jedi, I started to wonder. So, Don, how would you have done it if you were the director of the first film? How would you have done a sequel if you got ordered to come back? Well, that's the thing. In 2019, we had a film no one would expect to be good, called Joker. It turned out to be a hit. It didn't got mixed reviews from critics, but the critics didn't matter. Audiences really loved it. No, not for the reasons that people were thinking they did. They loved it because they thought it was well directed, and they thought the story was great. The performances were great. Joaquin Phoenix gave a great performance as this, well, it's not the comic book Joker. Like, that's the thing the first one already established. Like, the first film's not even a comic book movie. So what's the point of, it's great because the middle finger's comic book fans. This film wasn't even a comic book movie to begin with. The point is, it just has some elements of Batman in it. It's still set in Gotham. It's an alternate Gotham where there is no Batman. Like, that's the point. There's not supposed to be a Batman in this Gotham. It's its own thing. It just has elements where it's not a comic book movie. It's basically its own thing, you know? It's not trying to be that. So that doesn't automatically make something good. But back to this. This is going to be, if I was the director of the sequel. And the reason is because, well, this was inspired by Ajmarkle's If I directed Disney's Star Wars series, where what he would have done if he had directed Disney's Star Wars, and his version of Disney's Star Wars sounds better than what we got. So I randomly started thinking. I thought of films like Apocalypse Now and Scarface, Natural Born Killers, or stuff like those, like some other old gangster movies. How would I have done the sequel? Simple. First steps first. It's not a musical. No musical bullshit. It would be like the tone of the first film, except, well, the first film took inspiration from films like Taxi Driver. My movie would have taken inspiration from films like Scarface, films like Apocalypse Now, films like Natural Born Killers. It would not try to go into comic movie tone. Fine, you could still have some references to the Batman comics like the first one did, but it would not be a comic movie either. My version would have been about, well, it would have been about, him kind of, Arthur, kind of breaking out of prison and kind of like managing his own army of followers while at the same time struggling to kind of keep on to a bit of whatever bit of Arthur he has left. And kind of going more and more psychotic and more insane as while first bit of crimes would be successful, but then police efforts would start to ramp up more and would start to be a little more on top of their crimes, and some crimes would start to fail and would start to get a little more paranoid. It would kind of also, kind of like Red Dead Redemption 2, where Dutch started obsessing about one last heist. It would even take inspiration from the video game Red Dead Redemption 2 in a little way, with the Dutch Van der Linde game, It kind of be someone like that. So yeah, this is going to be for what would happen if how I would have directed Fully Do, because I feel, despite it being an unnecessary sequel, if I was a director, I would turn into an unnecessary sequel that, while sure, maybe it wouldn't be as good as the first film, maybe it still wouldn't get good reactions. It would, whatever I plan would still be better than what we got. So it would not, that there still wouldn't be Batman in it, okay? Because let's face it, Bruce Wayne's still a kid around the time Joker. Arthur Fleck still wouldn't be around by the time Batman was a thing. Batman wasn't a thing until he was long grown up and stuff. So, and I don't think the Joker was around the time he was a kid. So, yeah, there's still no Batman in this film. Sorry to disappoint you for those saying, are you going to finally put Batman? No, I'm not. Batman's still not going to be a thing in this movie. Alright? Because let's face that. By the time either he'd be too old to fight Batman or gone. So, this would still not have Batman either. Bruce Wayne's still technically a kid, and plus, then this wouldn't be set not too long after the first. Alright. So, here we go. How I would do the first act, the middle act, the final act, or the climax and the final act. So, alright, here we go. The first act of the movie would have been, alright, you know how the actual version, it's basically just spent in prison and court the entire film, not the first act, the whole entire film, in prison or court, and only in town for like a few minutes before he gets taken back to jail and dumped by Lee. Well, the first act, fine. He could be in jail for maybe the first 20 minutes, because obviously, you know, he got arrested at the end of the first film. This would be set, let's see, maybe about 3 months after the first. 3 months after the crime, 3 months after killing Randall, killing Murray, killing the subway people, 3 months after the first film. Obviously, it's at Arkham. And we're kind of getting to the trial, in a way. It could start off with him being trialed for his crimes. Obviously, so, first 20 minutes he'd be at Arkham. And it's pretty much getting him ready for his trial. And so, I guess you could keep Sophie and Gary's appearances. Yeah, obviously you could keep Gary's scene. Gary's scene I would definitely keep in the film because that was the one scene of the movie I liked. You could just say it like this. Or, obviously at first, you keep the scene of him meeting Lee because, while, yeah, Lee would stay in the movie, but she's not some manipulative gold digger. She'd get a huge rewrite. She's not going to be Harley Quinn. She's just going to be Lee. Alright? Let's keep it Lee this time around because it's better that way. So, obviously he still meets Lee. Lee would still be in the film. And they're shaving him for this, like, final week of the trial where he's, like, being trialed and the final witnesses are coming in. So after the scenes of him being prepped for trial and him meeting Lee, then it cuts to the courthouse. And basically, you could have maybe Sophie's brief bits, obviously to confirm that she's not dead, because, guys, Arthur would not kill Sophie. The only people he killed were the people who wronged him in the first one. Why would he kill Sophie? Like, just to confirm for the people who do think he killed Sophie, I would confirm that he didn't. Like, to kind of put those rumors down. So yeah, you get Sophie's scene, and then I would keep Gary's scene, obviously, because, like I said before, that's the best scene of the film, and also, it would kind of serve as a bit of a foreshadow for how my finale would have went, which I will get to when I'm explaining the final act of the movie. So, you keep Gary's scene, and it cuts, and of course after that, it kind of cuts to the next day, when they're at the verdict bit, and the other bit I would keep. They obviously announce him as guilty. No, we do not have the scene of him renouncing Joker at the beginning of the film. That would not be in the film. That's not how the finale would go. Okay, I would definitely not do that. The only stuff I would be keeping are just first 20 minutes of him in prison. Meeting Lee, obviously, to kind of introduce us to this character, because obviously she's in prison too. And no, she would not be there volunteering herself. She would have actually been arrested for actual crimes she did commit. No, I have those crimes actually have the crime scene he lied about actually would have happened in my version. But obviously not on screen. Obviously not. So, gets announced guilty. And then, of course, obviously the court blows up. And, of course, kind of stumbles out. There's no Harvey Dent. Harvey Dent would not be in this either. I don't know why he was in the actual version. And, of course, obviously the two followers rescue him. And instead of him escaping the car and running away over them burning down Gotham, instead he actually sails them to pretty much goes like once they find the rest of their followers back or wherever they're driving them to, as they're kind of announcing their plans, like obviously still a little bit of a shock from the bombing, so he just kind of just signals to stop with their plans right away because they got some other people to recruit. They got some of the inmates to break out of Arkham, obviously, but obviously not yet. They got to go back to the rest of the followers that are likely waiting for those two to rescue Arthur. And of course, then regrouping, and then it cuts to black for a little bit, and that's when like the first like few minutes are over. And then you would kind of, well, actually no, you'd get the main title during the bit he's getting prep for trial. No, the main titles would still be happening when he's getting prep for trial. All right, but it cuts to black after they kind of, after like that little bit in the car, and then of course, it's maybe like a few bits later where they've obviously off screen they spent the time planning out the breakout of Arkham people. And of course, there's now a truck filled with a few other of his followers. And they have another, and they kind of like plant this other bomb. And of course, it's a typical day at Arkham where you still have some corrupt guards that one of them would become a bit of a main character. No, one last thing I should say. Other thing I should say as well before I get into more of this, there would be no good guys in the movie. There would be no heroes. Everybody would be kind of a bad guy in this film. There wouldn't really be a good guy, really. It's more of a villain protagonist, kind of in the veins of, that's why I mentioned Scarface. Scarface didn't have good guys either. Alright, you don't have to have good guys in this movie. Scarface didn't. So, yeah, and Natural Born Killers doesn't really have good guys either, so why not? Anyway, like, so yeah, they break out, lead some of the other prisoners, and while a riot does kind of go on, like, there are some cops who show up and do shoot a few of the inmates that are escaping, but a number of them get away. And of course, once Lee and the rest of them are out, they pretty much mention, some followers ask, what are we going to do next? And of course, like, Arthur at the same time is starting to enjoy more of his Joker personality, but knows that cop rates are going to be stepped up, so they kind of gotta lay low for a little bit and leave Gotham for a little bit. It's like leave a little part that's a little out of Gotham, but a little bit near Gotham. So they drive to this closed down theater that's been closed for like a lot of years. Hasn't been demolished yet. And because Gotham doesn't know about this place, they would pick it. And this is the part where we kind of take veins of like Red Dead Redemption 2, where they're kind of, where Dutch Van der Linde, it started off with a Dutch gang fleeing to that little mountainscape where the game really began. It would do that. They drive there. And of course then they kind of lay low for a little bit, gotta like get like ready for some other crimes and stuff, gotta like train a little bit. This one prisoner they also broke out was this teenager who will play a bit of a role in the story as an apprentice. For a case like Arthur or Lee die in one heist, they're gonna need another Joker to take his place, in case that does happen. So that the Joker's legacy can still happen. No, it would not be a guy that just shanks Arthur like you know at the end of the film. No, that would not be that stuff. There would not be some real Joker that just makes a story a waste of time. No, that would not happen. Arthur would still technically be the Joker, just not the Joker you're from the comics. More of a different Joker is really kind of more like kind of like I say, kind of more of like a mob boss like Al Pacino's character in Scarface. So for a while, it's kind of establishing the kind of their little crime base. Arthur and Lee do get a little bit of moments together, and not like manipulative moments, like actual moments. In a way, and of course, like this will be like the first act, and then after you spend a little bit of time with Arthur and his followers, then you would get a subplot that involves the police, where one of the abusive Arkham guards would be because he was one of the ones that were guarding Arthur around the time of the week he had escaped, and the rest of the inmates they were watching escaped. Police would summon him to their place, and they would basically assign him, like they would offer higher raise and a rank up in the police force. They would tell him, you were the one who was guarding Fleck. You were the one who was guarding all the inmates you lost. And you failed to catch a few of them. Usually we would fire you for something like this, but we have decided a more proposal. You bring us the Joker, you bring us Fleck and his followers, or the Joker, alive. We promise a higher raise and onto the force if you bring us the Joker. And so, obviously this guard would become the main cop character, but once again, he would not be a hero, he'd be a scumbag, he'd still be one of the same scumbag guards, in a way, but except one that would get their comeuppance by the end of the film. I'm just clarifying this stuff. For those who are probably saying, aren't you just doing something that would be just as bad? Hold on. Yeah, this would be our main cop character. It would be a subplot of the cops that are trying to find the Joker and his followers and bring them back to justice or kill them. That would be that subplot, because have a subplot with the police, and then also have the main plot with Joker and his followers, and have a subplot with the cops that are trying to find trying to find them and bring them back to jail or execute them. That would be that. So for and then of course, after you kind of establish some time with Joker and his followers setting up their little crime base in the first act, the first act would be a little more slow. The first act would be a little more slow because you gotta reestablish some characters, you gotta reestablish the followers, you gotta reestablish Arthur's Joker and stuff. You gotta reestablish Lee a little bit. No. And obviously, so make the first act slow. Kind of introduce how the second and third and climax and finale are all gonna go. So after a little bit of more of a calm, slower first act, you get the second act where it would be some more heists and crimes. And them kind of building their criminal empire. Not the one you're familiar with in Batman, a different kind, a more mafia-styled one. Or a more heist gang-styled one, like the Dutch Van der Linde gang. So, and most of the violent acts in the movie that get caused by Joker, most of the killings would be done by Joker's followers, because while Arthur was technically more of a mentally sick in the head kind of Joker, he was only he killed the subway people in self-defense, and let's face it, the subway people deserved it. Killed his mom because his mom abused him when he was a child. Killed Randall because he basically got fired and bullied Gary. And of course killed Murray because he was basically planning to bully him on live TV. Just mainly killed the people that wronged him. Most of the innocent people ones would be done by his followers, because his followers are a little more, psychotic criminals than really he is. So most of the innocent people that got killed in the film would be getting killed by his followers. So they're first planning their first heist. And their first few heists are outside of Gotham. They're in different towns. So the first town they're robbing is a little bit of a smaller one. And they're going after, what could they go after? They go after a bit of a smaller bank. Or something like that. Actually, their first heist is a hotel. Set up their heist, their first little bit of heist. And basically, and it'll also be about them training the apprentice character, who wouldn't have a name until the finale. He would not just be an unnamed character up until the finale, while still being a main character, he wouldn't have a name, and this apprentice would not really speak much either. They're pretty much putting this apprentice kind of in charge of these heists while they're still attending the heist, still taking part in the heists, but they're still training their apprentice. Well, obviously Arthur would still take part in these like little heists, obviously because well he's still in charge of them, but at the same time he's training his apprentice to like be kind of leading the heist. So they have their first heist, and well, some little higher stakes about them getting caught might happen in this heist. At the same time, they are a little relatively successful for the first try. At the same time, and pretty much once like Fleck the Apprentice would leave, his followers pretty much decide to basically wait for him to be gone, and they shoot the rest of the people, kind of without his knowledge, because the only thing they kind of likely could say was really planning to kind of just kind of spare the innocents and really just kill kind of the staff owners. But the followers decide to kind of go against his back, and this would kind of start to kick in some downfall that's going to happen around near the end of the second act, where they basically shoot the rest of the customers at the bank who weren't really trying to interfere on their business, really, just because they feel like it. If the followers went by his back. But which he doesn't know about yet. So that pretty much ends that first heist for a little bit, and then you get a bit of a chase with our cop characters, who, for the time being, would kind of spend a bit of the middle act. Okay, sorry, I'm starting for a little bit. Would kind of like spend a bit of the middle act, trying to look all over Gotham, or kind of trying to trap, pretty much also kind of on their trail on the road. They're looking for the followers because the followers are not in Gotham around there. They've kind of fled Gotham, but they're looking in any towns they're in for them. And of course, they basically go after them, and they manage to shoot a car down. Some of his followers also kind of get shot in the pursuit. And it could be the ones that went behind his back. Were the ones who get shot, but they do manage to escape. Him and a number of his followers still manage to escape and get back to their little hideout, and then you get a bit of them celebrating their first heist. And no singing in the celebration, alright? You remember that stairs bit that was in the trailers that never happened? For the stairs bit in the sequel, for the trailers of the sequel that never happened? Well, you'd get that. You would get another stairs bit right there. You actually would get a stairs bit. Right there. It's them kind of like celebrating that they won their first heist. Obviously, though, Fleck doesn't know about the innocents that were shot by some of his dead followers that decided to just shoot for their own amusement. So, but their first heist was a success. But they note that they were also kind of chased by a few cops. And so they gotta be so maybe like Lee does suggest, maybe they should be a little more careful with their next heists if they don't want to draw too much attention to them. Don't want to draw too much attention before their return to Gotham. For what's going to be a big one that's going to happen at the end of the film. Well, and that would also kind of foreshadow the finale a bit too. So pretty much the middle act would pretty much be a few more heists going on. And the next place they would rob is a bar. Where, because the trailers make it look like they're killing a few people in a bar, which only ended up being another lousy musical sequence in the actual film, but it didn't look like they'd be killing a few people in a bar, so their next place they could rob is a bar. And of course, that bit, they then kind of kill a few people because, they also learn that the bar owner is corrupt and, let's just say, just wrongfully kicks out some other mentally ill customers that have the same disabilities as him, obviously. And when he kind of sees mistreating one, could bash him in with a stool. That could be their next place they rob, and they rob that bar and stuff, and his followers secretly kidnap some hostages. And then, of course, then they would have to drive off. And it would be a similar Red Dead Redemption 2-like sequence. And of course, like now, I try not to make my videos too long. That would be the middle act. The middle act would be some more heists going on. Obviously, some followers are kind of not following his code to not really kill every single person. Some of his followers decide they just want to kill for their own amusements. Where so they decide to go a little too psychotic with pretty much by joining the Joker. They go a little bit more psychotic, and so some heists do succeed, but then after like the third heist, police efforts are getting a little more ramped up. And then, of course, then their heists kind of start to kind of take a bit of a downfall because they lose a bit of money on their next few heists. So they don't come back with the earnings they had because either some of the money got burnt in their pursuit, or they had to kind of throw away a bit of the money to kind of block off the police from getting close to them. And of course, if the increasing failure of the heist starts to make Fleck a lot more paranoid, a lot more unstable than he was by the end of the first film. More crazy, worried about getting caught, kind of a little bit more crazy, worried about getting caught, and then it starts getting a bit more violent. Kind of like, how Michael Corleone got more and more violent as The Godfather Part 2 progressed, and how Tony became much more of a villainous lead character around as Scarface was progressing. That's where I say it would take the tones of Scarface, where when Tony became a much more violent criminal as Scarface progressed, Fleck would be kind of becoming a lot more of a violent version of his Joker. The point where he kind of stops caring about innocents being killed at this rate, and decides they have to now kill any witness they see, as like police are getting more and more onto them. And of course, because while my version of Lee is not a manipulative gold digger and has some sanity, and was obviously not Harley Quinn, would not be Harley Quinn in this version at all, would just be a character named Lee who's obsessed with the Joker. But is starting to get a little bit more worried about being on the Joker's side, and they kind of like their relationship would kind of take a bit of a downturn in the middle act, where kind of like the same way like Michael and Kate argue in The Godfather 2 at the "you won't take my children" bit. There would kind of be a bit of a bit like that, where there would be kind of a bit argument like that between them, where in a way, okay, like that. Not sure how I would describe it, but it would kind of be like that. Definitely about his paranoia, about how they kind of just want to go back to Gotham and just get whatever big plans they have over with, or just flee to another town because they're going to be caught soon if they stay. But Arthur doesn't want to go anywhere. He kind of wants to stay where they are. And this is the point where he starts really loving his Joker personality a little too unhealthily. And where he gets a little more and it makes him more unstable. It makes him more psychotic by this point. So eventually, then of course, remember that cop character, the abusive guard who would become this like cop just to catch the Joker and be promoted. Then he kind of also does play in the middle act, where what kind of would break them into this final act that will get crazier is because Lee at one point then kind of runs out and starting to contemplate leaving the gang at this point, but by that point though, you see that a cop car was waiting outside that entrance, likely waiting for a follower, because what would probably lead to this next one I'm going to mention. So one of the failed heists would also, I should have mentioned this earlier, one of the failed heists is a follower would be an idiot and accidentally fucks up and sets off the alarm on one of their heists. He accidentally fucks up the alarm while they're getting out, trips over, and he has to kind of go back and scramble for a bit of the money that they're going to lose. But at the same time, though, while he's scrambling, he accidentally bumps into the alarm on his way out, and that pretty much alerts the cops that they were there, and that would lead to one of the chases right there, and that would lead to the first epically failed heist. And that would kick off Arthur's paranoia, where he starts to get paranoid about being caught. He would get paranoid about one last heist before they stop their heist and go back to Gotham and destroy it, and then go somewhere else to carry out the rest of their stuff and just live out for good in some other big area. But now I mention this. This is what would lead to this next thing I'm going to mention. That cop car that was waiting outside that abandoned place that was their hideout is watching Lee kind of walk out, would follow her all the way to this like dark empty alley. No, don't worry, this would not be a rape scene. This would not be a rape. I would not do that in any films I directed. No. You would not get any of that in this version. Not like what you got in the actual movie. No, there would not be that. This would actually be a death scene. And you find out that this cop, this abusive guard turned cop, really does not care about Gotham and does not care about putting an end to the Joker chaos in Gotham at all. He would actually only agree because he actually wants kind of control of the police force to the point where he wants to control the whole city, and so he'd be a scumbag too. Nobody in this film would be a good guy. He'd still be a scumbag because he would want control of Gotham. He would want control of the entire police force to the point where even some likely disabled people that weren't committing crimes, he probably wouldn't hesitate to arrest them too just because he felt like having authority over them. So he'd still be an awful person as well. He would still be a really bad character. So this guy would follow you to this abandoned alley, and he would pretty much have the cops are still with him that haven't died yet from his followers. Basically, they would pretty much follow her there, get out of their cars, and they would basically kill her. Yeah, and that would pretty much set up the final act, how the final act is going to go down. They basically would kill her, and they would just guise it as a suicide to basically cover their tracks right there, and I would make it a disturbing death scene. I would. It kind of shows how much of an awful person this villainous cop character would be. And it would need to set up the more crazy, violent third act that I'm going to get to in a little bit. Yeah, basically, her death scene would take place in a dark, empty alley, because where else was he going to go? Where do you have to kill in? The public city where people could see them? No, they'd have to do that somewhere where nobody could see them. Obviously. A little bit deeper into the alleyway. Right there. And then turns another corner and then falls down to another corner. And so they pretty much guise it as, so after this scene would kind of go for like 2 minutes, and then it would kind of cut away before the final blow could happen. And then, of course, the next morning, they know Lee is nowhere to be found. And then, of course, there would be a TV at their hideout, obviously. A TV that they would probably stole from one of their heists. One of the followers, like, the apprentice is watching the news. And, like, another thing about the apprentice would kind of, like, also start getting a little more insane as well. Even he would start really loving his, like, little heist work as well. And even he would start getting a little bit more violent while still not speaking for the rest of the film. Just like that, they're watching the news, and they see on the news that one member of the infamous Joker gang was found dead with her neck slit and a knife in her hand this morning. And so, obviously, this would make Fleck the Apprentice and some of the followers devastated. And by this point, Fleck would snap. Like, really snap at that point. And any calmness he would have left would be gone. Full-blown Joker by that point. And at this point, he kind of would, maybe he'd stop caring about either if they die in their next heist, and would kind of decide, and this is where the Red Dead Redemption 2 bit kind of kicks off. They decide to do one more heist, and they have to go to Gotham to do their heist, and then they're done. They're going to run away farther all out of Gotham, and they're going to have to go somewhere where the law won't be onto them. With the followers he has left. So, but some followers who actually weren't or killing some of the innocents actually would get scared of doing another heist because they're now worried, because now that Lee's dead, they think the police are now really onto them and they're going to be caught on their next heist right away. So they basically flee. So those ones flee, but only a few. It would only be 4 of them. Everybody else would stay. Because they'd be all up for a crazy heist in Gotham. So they finally plan out their last heist, and this is where the final act would begin. They're pretty much flying, they're pretty much driving, they're finally back in Gotham. Some citizens see them, and they're feared, they realize the Joker's back. And they pretty much are now terrified knowing that the Joker and his followers are all back, and they pick the most successful bank in the world that could put them in recession. If anything happens to the money, like they're on the last bit of recession, collapse into recession, and the one successful bank that is left in Gotham is the one they pick to rob to really bring Gotham to the ground. So they kick off their heist, but little do they know, this abusive cop character and his army have already alerted the Gotham police that they are there. So they're also like, they managed to get the money. They do get the money, they're successful, but they see an army of SWAT are already there. And so this is where you get your Scarface-style finale. A shootout with the SWAT and the followers would all happen. Much like in the veins of Scarface, it would kind of turn to a bit of a war zone. And at that point, and while they're taking care of Flex, some followers and the apprentice character would flee to the destroyed remains of the courthouse, where it still hasn't been rebuilt yet. It's still destroyed. They flee for a little bit, and our abusive cop character follows them there, and the ones that helped him early would be there too. And so while the followers that followed Arthur there would shoot those cop characters, they'd also be shot in the process too, to the point where it was the abusive cop left and Fleck left, and for a while it seemed like one would shoot the other. But then of course at that bit, Fleck then relives the day of Gary's words to him in the court, how that day Gary's last words in court that day would play in his head, and then he would stop and hesitate for a moment, and no, he'd still not renounce Joker. All right, like now, if this was what made him reflect on being Joker, it'd be less infuriating. Like, you think of Gary's words and decides to just not shoot the cop character, just walk away, just likely never to come back to Gotham ever again. And as he's walking away, though, the cop character takes this advantage. And then of course, if I made a sequel that wanted to kill Fleck, here's how I would have done it. Would he get shanked by some random guy who becomes a real Joker? No. Instead, this abusive cop character would shoot him as he's walking away, while still in his Joker attire. He then collapses and he starts arrogantly dancing, thinking he's finally killed the Joker, and celebrating, thinking he's finally killed the Joker, and now he's likely going to have the control of the police force. But as he's arrogantly celebrating that he's thinking he's finally put a stop to the Joker, you would see a blurry little shot of the apprentice actually running. And of course, by the time he turns around as he finishes his arrogant dances, walking with a smile on his face, you would get a jump scare where, because I would make this scene come out of nowhere, where the apprentice would actually run up and shank the abusive cop in the stomach. That would be the shanking death. The abusive cop would get the shanking death, and his face immediately turns to a shock of fear when he sees the apprentice wearing the same makeup Arthur had. And he pretty much now realizes that while he may have killed Arthur, the Joker is never going to be gone. And realizes now his efforts were all for... Now this abusive cop realizes his efforts and mission were all for nothing, and he's going to bleed to death. And just like that abusive cop character dies. And then the apprentice would just leave, but the SWAT have already caught the apprentice, and they would arrest him. And they would take him to Arkham. They've captured a few remaining followers he has left. it would kind of cut to a different courthouse where the apprentice and the followers they arrested are all being trialed for all the heists that they did. And there would also be a news report around the same time where obviously the news report would be obviously got broadcast around the time that they had finally killed, that Fleck had finally been killed, and they announced breaking news in Gotham today: the terror of the Joker has come to an end as our cop character. Well, I don't know if I come up with a name for this cop character, but they were like as while he was shot down, he had managed in the nick of time to bring the end to Arthur Fleck and arrested some of his followers before one other follower of his had walked up and had officially stabbed him to death about in the nick of minutes. While the stabber was thankfully apprehended seconds afterwards, the chaos has seemingly come to an end as they would finally address the apprentice's name. The apprentice's name is Jack. And because that's kind of a comic Joker's name is Jack, so they finally address his name as Jack. As Jack and the remainder of Joker's followers have all been trialed and are about to be given a life sentence today. And so then it would cut to them in court. The judge obviously announces Jack and the remaining followers guilty, sentences them to life in Arkham with no parole. And while the apprentice would have a bit of sadness on his face, obviously still mourning his somewhat father or mentor figure and his other mentor who was killed in the alley. But also with a look of anger as well, with his hatred of Gotham. And of course, this is when he finally speaks. As he's pretty much being led away to Arkham with a few other followers, he's pretty much yelling, screaming. He'd be yelling, screaming in a psychotic tone, "I'm gonna get all of you! I'm gonna get all of you, and I'm gonna make this whole city pay!" As he's and also just maniacally laughing as he's screaming all that, as he's being led to jail. And the court's just kind of left stunned and wondering if the Joker's reign is really over. And then, of course, you get your last scene of the film, where this one guard is walking to Jack's cell. And this scene would take place 20 years later, where he's now more middle-aged. His makeup is starting to crack. His hair's now all jagged. While he's still wearing the same clown makeup Arthur did. He's not wearing the one you're familiar with. Because this isn't the Batman. Because this isn't trying to be a Batman-like story. Because Batman's still not in this film. This is not setting up Batman at all. This guard comes in and says, "Jack, you have an interview with a doctor who is going to try to cure your mental health and see if you're fit for parole." Because maybe they did change their minds, and as he's just staring at that wall, you kind of see a bit of his face, all cracked and all wrecked. And you see a bit of dirty teeth as well, when he forms his little smile. And he says, "Jack is dead. You can call me the Joker." And he does a maniacal laugh as he's pretty much walking out with that guard. Just walking out slowly with a bit of a grin on his face, because he has another plan. He's going to use this meeting to likely break out. And he's going to start the Joker's reign all over again. So, sure, Arthur may have been gone, but the Joker is never gone. Not the real. Why did I say the real? The successor is beginning. And even worse chaos is likely going to follow. Maybe someday Batman may be around, but I would not hint at that. Maybe someday he would, but it will take a while before any of that could ever happen. And You would end with a freeze shot there on his on his terrifying smile. You would actually end with a freeze shot on his jagged, wrecked face, and and then I'd roll the credits there, and I would put Tom Jones's cover, "What the World Needs." What the world needs is love. What the world needs is love. As the credits are playing over the freeze shot of his face. That's the song that would play to close out the movie. And that'd be my version. That would be my version. Alright. Maybe it still wouldn't be liked by some people, but come on. It would still be better than it would still be at least better than what we got. I think that if they went that way, then it would still be at least decently better, because at least it still didn't shit on the first film. At the very least, it was actually did also kind of feel like a continuation of the first, from kind of like from there, without trying to become all Batman-like. But other than that, sadly, that's not what we got, and that's not what we will ever get. So, the first film will forever be a standalone, sadly. But that would be cool if what we got. Now, this film that's going to be directed by Maggie Gyllenhaal, called The Bride, is supposed to be... People are already calling that the real sequel, so when that film comes out, maybe we could call that the real sequel. We never know. Maybe that could end up being called the real sequel. But if the actual sequel went like this, then maybe I wouldn't mind it. Maybe I wouldn't mind it. I think that would be better than what we got, at the very least, or maybe good, or maybe at least, but not too bad. At least better than the musical crappy movie we got. Until then, guys, I'm going to end this here. That will be it for this video. Thank you all for watching. And if you like this and want to see more, don't forget to subscribe to Don G. Corleone.